Welcome to this episode of B2B Revealed. If you want to learn about how to succeed in B2B, this is the show for you. My name is Sean Campbell, and I'm the host of B2B Revealed. I love to hear from listeners about any topic you might like me to cover in the future on the show. To send me a suggestion, just email me at sean@cascadeinsights.com. And if you love this podcast, don't forget to give us a review on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you happen to listen to the show. On this episode, I'll be interviewing Jill Konrath, a well-known thought leader when it comes to sales strategy, tactics, and how all that comes together in B2B. I'm sure you're going to love hearing what she has to say. Also, as a side note, over the next 4 to 6 interviews on the show, you'll notice a bit of variance in the audio quality from interview to interview. That's because I'm experimenting with a few different services to record those podcast interviews, including Ringer, Zencastr, IPDTL, and Skype. Once I give each one a run for their money, I'll let you know which one I found to be the best. Now, on to the show. As I mentioned earlier, on this episode of the show, we have Jill Konrath, who's the author of 4 well-known books on selling and has been a well-known thought leader in the sales field for a number of years. She's also a self-described victim of ARD, addictive reading disorder, something I've dealt with myself if you saw the number of Kindle books I have. Jill, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your background? I first came across you from reading your book, Selling to Big Companies, and then I went on to read some of the other books you have too, as well as your latest book. But I think you've got a unique perspective on sales. So maybe tell the listeners a little bit about that and a little bit about your background.
Sure. I actually started my sales career at Xerox and was there for a number of years and did really well, and then moved into technology sales. And then ultimately I was in selling business services to the corporate market. So that was my background. And at that point, I jumped off and started my own consulting firm. And my specialty really was new product launch. I mean, that was where I focused with my clients and how to help them jumpstart the sales of their new product in the marketplace. And I worked in the gap between marketing and sales. And then about 10 years ago, I noticed that things were really changing in the sales field, and it was getting more and more difficult for people to connect with decision makers. And so I actually spent a full year studying what did it take to capture the attention of a decision maker and get them to return your call or, respond to your email. And from there, I wrote the book Selling to Big Companies, which is the one that you said you started out reading. But since that time, I've been doing a lot of research in terms of how do you adjust to the different changing marketplaces that you're selling into, and what are the new issues that salespeople are facing, and what do they have to learn. And to me, that's always been the most fascinating part. How do we have to respond to the changing market conditions?
That's a great summary. And I highly recommend that folks check out your site. You've got, regular blog posts and all kinds of stuff that you share as well. So let's walk through the 4 books that you've done. I think, it's always helpful for folks to just get a quick snapshot on what you were trying to address and what do you feel the solution was in a nutshell. So can you walk through that with, Agile Selling, which is one of your books, Snap Selling, Selling to Big Companies, and then obviously you can conclude with, the more recent book, More Sales in Less Time.
Yes, to me, all my books start with an issue or a challenge that people are facing. And the first one, Selling to Big Companies, was really to address how do we get in, to set up a meeting with a corporate decision maker. The second book came a few years later. And again, the problem that I was running into in my own sales initiatives were that I'd be working with people and then suddenly they'd go radio silent. And they'd stop communicating with me, even if they wanted to work with me. And so what I discovered is that what was really happening is that the buyers were crazy busy in every aspect of their life, and they literally couldn't move off the status quo. It was so hard for them because of the sheer amount of work that they had to do. And so that, after spending a year researching what would work when dealing with crazy busy buyers, I wrote Snap Selling, and that's to focus on the crazy busy buyer issue. Shortly after that came out, people immediately said to me, "Oh my God, Jill, this is working. People are getting back to me. I'm getting them to keep moving in their decision process, but I'm crazy busy too. What do you have for me?" And at first I said nothing because I was crazy busy as well. But then I realized that during my years of consulting, what I did know was how to get up to speed fast in a new sales position, because I always was launching new products. So I always had to come in as a new person and figure out what did it take to go to market fast and how did you do it. So I wrote Agile Selling to help people quickly get up to speed so they wouldn't be floundering when they switched jobs or were new in the sales profession. And then finally, I kept hearing from people that they were still crazy busy. And again, I said, I'm crazy busy too. And I finally went, well, this must be the issue that we're all facing today, because everybody I'm talking to is crazy busy. And I finally said, okay, I got to change my life. Let me study this. And so I really actively worked on switching how I was working and learning as much as I could. And then I wrote a book to help other people gain control of their time so that they could do more work and better work and have a life.
That's a really nice wrap up of each of the books. And so let's talk about that latest book, because I think for this audience, while they may find a lot of information from the other books interesting, particularly selling to big companies, just because I know that some of our own clients obviously listen to the podcast, and we tend to work with mid-market and enterprise companies. So that's a strong recommendation there. But the other thing that I find interesting about the latest book is that because we work with clients that are fairly hyper accelerated, not only are they large, but they're predominantly technology companies, which then also move at a fairly fast clip. They have this problem that, like we talked about in a quick chat you and I had, that, it's not just more sales in less time, it's more marketing in less time and more products in less time and, all of that kind of stuff. So I want to start with one thing that you said toward the beginning of the book. You said the more time we spend in an environment that gives us quick hits of seemingly vital, but likely irrelevant information, the harder it is for our brains to do the kind of creative and strategic thinking that is so necessary. So talk to me a little about what caused you to write that and what led you to that observation.
Well, what led me to that observation was, certainly personal at the core. But then when you do research into neuroscience and you find out how allowing ourselves to be constantly interrupted and seduced into, clicking, reading, watching, listening, whatever we're doing, and then to come back, it really has a horrendous effect on our ability to think creatively. And we come up with fewer ideas. The strategies and the thinking that we do is much more shallow. I mean, if we're trying to enter a new market or think of a new way to do something, and we're constantly jumping from one task to another, we are literally not accessing the best part of our brains because we just can't go there. At first, when I entered it, I thought it was a time issue that we were dealing with and how to get more done in less time. But when I really stepped back and looked at it, it was a mind issue. It was that we can't think. And in today's business environment, the ability to be creative and strategic and find new approaches to stand above the crowd is probably our most important asset. And we're flittering it, away, which just, it's awful to me to see all that brain power being lost.
And related to that, I think, and giving an example of it, per se, of how much we're kind of affected by irrelevant things grabbing our attention. You brought up a statistic in the book that I think is pretty shattering in terms of its implications, right? You said that 70% of emails received, and this is based on other research you found, right? 70% of emails received are attended to within 6 minutes of arriving in our inbox.
6 seconds, I think it is.
Oh, 6 seconds. Okay, there you go. And so which is even worse. I remembered it as 6 minutes. 6 minutes would be bad enough. And you said, and this is probably the most important thing, is that the recovery time for that interruption is 10 to 20 times the length of the interruption. Because I think what most people do is, well, I'm a good multitasker. I deal with interruption well. I'm good at this. My IQ stays the same regardless of how interrupted I am. And basically, the research you found is not only do you kind of get dumber as you try to respond to all that, your recovery time to even get back to being smarter is much longer than you might think it is.
Right. I mean, just literally stopping because you got these pings or whatever notifications you have that tell you have a new email. You go look at it. You don't think it's anything. And, you may not do anything about that email. You may just look at it and say, that can wait. But to get your head back in the game, in terms of, now, where was I on my thinking? That takes 10 to 20 times the length of the interruption. So you can fritter away most of your day just going in and out of email and watching and attending to the emails that come in. We've got to stop that because it's killing our capacity to really bring our creativity and our best thinking to the table.
And another thing that I think is particularly interesting about that in terms of a challenge is I think some people would say, well, fine, I'll be more structured. I'll answer my email in certain blocks of time. And you even mentioned that in the book, is like finding ways to kind of just say, this is my email answering time. But I think what most people don't recognize is that there's a dopamine issue here, which you address very directly in the book. And I also have seen in a book I'm currently reading now. So I'll tell the listeners whether I like it or not, I guess, when I get all the way done with it. But so far, it's been pretty good. It's called Irresistible: The Rise of Addictive Technology and the Business of Keeping Us Hooked. And it talks about in depth, too, this issue that it is not about you being more organized or less responsive. It's that you get hooked on this feeling of goodness because you're responding to people right away. And I think for a lot of people in larger corporations, that's a factor, is that they don't realize they're wiring their brain to kind of feel good about the instant responding. And it's particularly true of salespeople, I think, but it's true of other roles as well.
Yes, it's the addiction of dopamine is just tremendous, and not only is it what sucks us into all these interruptions, it's what, we want it so badly. We want to check email again, we want to do this, we want to do that, and we're literally caught in a cycle, and we're not running the show anymore. The executive center of our brain is not running the show. And to me, that was like, when I got that at a core level, I went, this is not how I want to work. I don't want to have dopamine running my day and, and getting all these little, oh, I feel good. Oh, I feel good. I responded right, deleted that email right away. I wanted to do real work. I wanted to do work that mattered. I wanted to do my work at my highest possible level, as opposed to being constantly pulled away because I have dopamine surging through my system, urging me to do more and click on that LinkedIn article and go down a rabbit hole. And the next thing I know, I'm looking at what Kim Kardashian is wearing at some event. I mean, that's like god awful.
Yeah, that's not exactly a good way to be productive, from that standpoint. But I think the key thing is that you're training your body to essentially want more of that kind of interruptus,
Yes.
method of dealing with your environment. And so it's not about, just a logical response to what you're doing. You have to actually almost untrain yourself from that method, because your body has to detox a little bit from being focused on that kind of quick interaction.
Yes, and a lot of people do take great pride in their responsiveness, and they don't realize that it's hurting them. I mean, they may be responsive and get that quick dopamine hit, but it's not helping them do their job at the quality level that they want to. But it's so addictive, so addictive. I mean, the only thing I found I simply did not have the willpower to resist. And it's that enticing. And I've never been one who struggled with willpower before, but in the last decade, the iPhone's been out now for, I think, 10 years, right? And I noticed that my willpower was less and less, and I was more and more doing that interruption stuff. And I'm a fairly reasonable and competent person, but I could feel it eroding just because of that. It's like, that is not how we want to work. So what I found is that I literally had to protect myself from the interruptions and to create barriers so that I am able to do my work effectively and not get lost in the dopamine cycle.
Yeah, and related to that, I think there's something that you mentioned in the book. I think you're quoting essentialism, where you say, if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. And then you say, unless we live by design, we live by default. And to me, that was one of those moments where I'm reading the book and I go, okay, that, you take that extra breath and you read it over 3-4 times and you say, yeah, that's something for me to think about, because living by the default is not a way to be super successful, especially in a high stakes, large company environment.
That's right. It's not a way to be successful. And we really have to realize that our time is our greatest asset, and blocking off times where we can really focus on what really matters enables us to get it done certainly more quickly, but at a higher caliber. It's higher caliber work. And if we just keep bouncing, we can't do that.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the tools and methodologies and, frameworks, if you want to think about it that way, for kind of getting out of the dopamine cycle and for kind of living more by design than default. And the place I'd like to start with is, you mentioned even that you had some apps that you use to kind of make the problem a little more visible for you. So what were some of those apps? Are you still using them? And then you can kind of go on into some other methods or frameworks that you've used to kind of add a little sanity back.
Yeah, well, I mean, let me just say that the very first thing I did is, once I got serious about this, is I turned off all notifications on everything, except Twitter, which is what I keep from my family. Not Twitter, texting is my family communications. But I turned off all notifications. So I have no idea when emails come in or, when people are calling, when I have things set to go away, don't bother me. I'm trying to focus. And that's the number one thing everybody can do. And I believe, only like 15 to 20% of us are turning off notifications. We're mostly just going with whatever is set automatically on our cell phones when we get them. So turning off notifications is the easiest thing that everybody can do right now. The other thing I did is I got Rescue Time. And Rescue Time is an app that you can get a free version or you can get a paid version for like $10 a month. And it actually shows you how you're using your time on your computer or on your cell phone or on your, whatever device you're using. And it's a real eye opener. It was a real shocker for me to see how much of my time was spent in useless places, but somehow I'd gotten there and spent way too much time there, which was a wake-up call for me and a prime driver of saying that I really have to change. Another app that I have found extraordinarily useful is SaneBox, which is an app that you can get. Again, it's not very costly. It's, pretty cheap. And with SaneBox, all your emails go into SaneBox, and then you start moving the ones that you want into your inbox. But for those of us who have signed up for newsletters that we want, that's not mission critical work. It's something we want to look at, but we don't want to have interrupt our work. And so SaneBox allows you to pocket, to create a place for that to go and keeps it separate from your main work. And I found it extraordinarily helpful. Unroll.me was another app that I used that helped me unsubscribe from things and to get a daily digest of some of those things that I want. So there was just a ton of things. And Freedom was another one. So I've used all these apps because I'm trying to protect myself, against my normal human nature that wants to be interrupted and craves that dopamine. And this is my protection. And what Freedom does is it allows you to block yourself from going on either certain sites or online at all, if you have work to do, for a period of time that you designate on one app or all your apps, or not on one device or on all your devices. So this is the protection thing. And I think the first step in anybody doing this is to gain control of the distraction, to regain your brain. And then you can do the other things. But if we're constantly in that dopamine cycle, we're toast in terms of being our best.
Those are great suggestions in terms of the apps. I've actually looked at some of those since reading the book and installed a few of them, and they're really exceptional. I mean, a lot of the stuff you mentioned, I previously used Unroll.me too, and that's a really great service for kind of cleaning out. If you use Gmail and your promotions tab has 62 newsletters that you can't even remember what you subscribe to.
Yep.
It'll kind of vaporize all those for you pretty quickly. One slightly different subject area I want to focus on, because I think it's related to productivity in general, just in a business environment. And it references a great Mark Twain quote, which I don't know if there is a bad Mark Twain quote, but this is actually a really good one, is you were referencing Mark Twain and you said, when he stated, eat a live frog first thing in the morning and nothing worse will happen to you all day. And I think you then riffed off that and started to talk about, in the context of sales prospecting, but I think it's true of other things. Every job has stuff that's challenging to do. You're like, just take that first thing in the morning and kill it before 10:30, and the rest of the day will probably be a lot more productive as a result.
Yes, it really does make a difference. I mean, there are things that all of us dread doing, but they have to get done, and they're a priority, but it's like, oh God, I just don't want to. The biggest issue with that, I think, is getting started for most people. And it's like, once you get started, it actually is okay. So I found that using the Pomodoro technique was really helpful for me to do some of that stuff even. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's just, kind of like a beat the clock type of game where you set the timer, and you can get an app for that too, but you set the timer for 25 minutes and you just say, okay, I'm going to just work on it for 25 minutes. And literally, once you get past the first 3 minutes or so, your brain has stopped resisting. And then you get into the work. And after, when the timer goes off at 25 minutes, literally research shows that if you get up and move around and take a 5-minute break, you can come back and get right into it again and take another 25-minute session. And you will be, again, it'll refresh your brain and you're performing at a higher level. And so just moving around or doing something totally unrelated allows your brain to rest, replenish, and then you get back to work. And so you can accomplish so much, and especially in the morning, if you have a hard time getting started, by just setting that Pomodoro timer for 25 minutes and getting started on it.
Those are great tips, and I am familiar with Pomodoro, and if the listeners aren't, there are a lot of apps and browser extensions and utilities and stuff that you can use to get started with that. And that concludes my interview with Jill Konrath. Jill had a lot of great things to say about B2B, B2B sales, and just working in B2B in general. I highly recommend that you visit her site at jillkonrath.com. And finally, if you love this show, do give us a review on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you happen to listen to the show. Thanks for listening.